Welcome to episode 162 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show the public who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to Special Agent Tom O'Connor and Special Agent Gene O'Connor. Tom O'Connor is the current president of the FBI Agents Association, and Gene O'Connor is a trustee for the Agent Association's Scholarship Fund. They're both currently detailed to the Human Resource Division at FBI headquarters to identify current and retired FBI agents who continue to battle illnesses related to 9/11 and to make them aware of the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. On behalf of the FBI Agents Association, Tom and Gene O'Connor pledge to ensure that these victims and their families obtain the benefits they need and deserve, and to honor the 9/11 FBI line of duty deaths of those who have already made the ultimate sacrifice. Retired agents can learn more about the Victim Compensation Fund registration guidelines at the Human Resource Division hotline 202-324-3333. In this episode, Gene and Tom O'Connor, in their capacity as FBI Agent Association officials, review the work performed and the devastating health-related complications experienced by FBI agents who responded to terrorist attack sites at the World Trade Center in New York, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., the plane crash site in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, in addition to evidence collection sites. Special Agent Thomas O'Connor entered on duty with the FBI in 1997. During his career, he has worked both international and domestic terrorism cases on the Joint Terrorism Task Force in the Washington Field Office, and is a team leader on the evidence response team. In this capacity, Tom O'Connor has led forensic teams to multiple terrorist attacks around the globe. In 2004, Tom O'Connor was awarded the Department of Justice Instructor of the Year Award and was named as an FBI Master Police Instructor in 2010. Special Agent Gene O'Connor joined the FBI in 1998. In 2000, she became a member of the Washington Field Office Evidence Response Team and was named Senior Team Leader in 2006. As the senior team leader, she coordinates the activities of a 40-person ERT team. On September 11th, Gene O'Connor was a first responder to the U.S. Pentagon, where she initially assisted in setting up the temporary morgue and later led a multi-agency team in evidence and human remains recovery inside the Pentagon. Special Agent Gene O'Connor has been deployed overseas to investigate terrorist attacks and process crime scenes, and has led forensic teams in documenting and identifying evidence of complex coordinated attacks. Gene and Tom are here today to talk to us about these 9/11 complications, but they also share with us what exactly FBI first responders were responsible for in those early days after the 9/11 attacks. But most importantly, what they hope to do during this episode is to reach out to any retired agents or current agents who are not aware of the Victim Compensation Fund. Before we get to the interview, just a few things. First, I want to let you know that my new granddaughter, Wendy, is doing great. She's still in the hospital and may be there for several weeks, but she's healthy and getting stronger every day. So thank you for asking about her. I also want to bring you up to date on my next book, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a Manual for Armchair Detectives. I heard from FBI headquarters today, their pre-publication unit. They wanted to let me know that they're still reviewing the book and that it may take a little bit longer than the normal 30 days because of all the FBI topics and subjects that I cover in the book. In each chapter, I discuss one of my top 20 cliches and misconceptions about the FBI and provide a reality check while breaking down the facts. While you're waiting for the book to be published, why not join my reader team and get the FBI reality checklist to discover the top 20 FBI myths and misconceptions? You can join my reader team at jerrywilliams.com, or if you're listening on a podcast app that supports links, you can join in the description of this episode. Thank you. Now here's the show. I am excited to introduce my guests today, Jean and Tom O'Connor. How are you guys doing today?
Excellent. Thanks for having us, Jerry. We really appreciate it.
Yep, we're doing really well.
Now, usually I have on the show retired agents, but you both are actually active agents with the FBI. And you are here talking to me today in your capacity, Tom, as the president of the FBI Agents Association, and Jean as a trustee for the Memorial College Fund for the association. You're going to give us some insight on one specific issue.
That's right, Jerry. We want to talk today about 9/11 illnesses and, unfortunately, 9/11 deaths that have hit the first responder community at large. And as part of that, the FBI, unfortunately, is feeling that pain also.
Both of you are very aware of this issue, too, and we'll get into that. I know, Jean, in your case, you are a senior team leader for the evidence response team in Washington, and these are the very people who responded to the different terrorist attack sites on 9/11. So this is really something near and dear to what you're doing today.
It is, and every evidence response team across the country had members who responded to one of the three sites. So every team out there, and we have over 2,000 members, did respond either up to the World Trade Center site, to the Fresh Kills landfill where all of the debris was sifted from the World Trade Center, to the Pentagon, or to the Shanksville site. And it is near and dear to our heart because we have lost ERT members and first responders from all three sites.
Well, before we go on, I want to say this, and of course, by the time I've listened to you and have had the opportunity to learn more, I hope I won't change my mind about what I'm going to say. And that is that I've always had two regrets, at the end of my career. And one was that I never took a class through the FBI Academy. I think I would have been good at that. And I regret that, because of family situation and the kids, that I, did not volunteer to, spend that time down there taking, brand new agents through training. And my other regret is that I did not have the opportunity to respond to any of the terrorist attack sites. I mean, I've admired the friends of mine and my colleagues that, did drop everything and spend days, weeks, months at those sites. I was in Philadelphia, and on the day of the attack, they sent us all home to pack a bag, and we all came back to the office. But then they decided there was still chaos, no place for us to stay. People weren't sure what was going on, so only a select few got to go. And I was always disappointed. I wish I had been able to respond.
Yeah, and I think, it's one of those things where we at Washington Field Office, we thought we were headed up to New York. We had gotten the word to be on call, and then the plane hit the Pentagon, and it shifted to that. And I think, there is a common thread throughout the ERT members that going and responding to these events, whether it was on 9/11 or to the more recent types of attacks that we respond to, the most important things that we do are to make sure that the crime scenes are documented to the best of our ability so that the victims do receive the justice in the courtroom when it gets to that point. There is another part of that, and I think that we have talked to many of our ERT members that have gotten sick and have passed. Even those, and I've read the words this week because we're preparing for Police Week, and Brian Cruz, who was one of our retired agents who passed away last year, in his words, he knew that he was sick And he said he still would not have changed it. He was most proud of the work that he did as a Sacramento ERT member responding to New York.
And Jerry, that's something that we do hear frequently from people who are being treated for different illnesses, is that it wouldn't have changed anything. There's, just as you said, it's one thing that you feel that you would have done differently, you wished you had partaken in. Even the people who are having issues, they still would not have changed anything. And when we talk about 9/11 being a day that changed the world, the United States, and people, for Gene and I, it changed our careers. We decided literally on that day. I remember when I decided that I was going to stay in counterterrorism. I came in 97 and got deployed to Africa for the bombings in 98. And first day at the scene of the embassy bombings, I said, this is bigger than anything I had worked as a police officer for the years I worked. And this is so important. I'm going to stay working counterterrorism. Well, on 9/11, as Gene said, we were at WFO getting ready to go to New York. Gene was actually at Quantico at evidence team training. And when we ended up at the Pentagon, Scott Stanley and I were some of the first agents on scene. When we pulled up to that building there, I realized that in the coming weeks that my career path was going to be staying an agent and working on the evidence teams so that I can deploy to events like this and work these events and not, never put a 954 in. Gene's never put a 954 in for promotion, because we don't want to be away from the field when something horrendous happens. We want to be part of that. And it's the same sentiment you spoke about. You don't want to miss that one. And we've changed our career path so that we didn't miss them. And unfortunately, over the years, there's been a lot of deployments that have been large, and we're honored to have been involved in many of those. But 9/11 is still one that stands out completely from anything else in a career.
Well, let's first, if you can give us just a quick review of the sacrifices that some of the agents who did respond have made. What is going on? Because in 2018, there just seemed to be so many notices about agents who had died of illnesses that were related back to 9/11 complications. So let's talk about that. Just if you can give us just kind of a introduction and a recap. And then what I'd like to do is go all the way back to 9/11. And, we've always talked about how 9/11 was investigated, from the investigator level, interviewing people, talking to people, things like that. But also part of the investigation was the gathering of evidence. And that's what was occurring at the different attack sites. So I'd love to talk about what people were doing at the attack sites, at the World Trade Center, at the Pentagon, at Shanksville, what they were doing. So I'd like to go through each of those sites and go into detail about what an FBI agent does in those situations. But then I really do also want to take some time, just a little lighter side, and talk about you two and your own story. There are a number of married agent couples in the FBI, and so I want to touch on that too. So if we can do that and still be respectful of the topic, I'd like to do that. So why don't we start and you give us a solid introduction as to what the findings are right now?
So currently, the FBI is, unfortunately, we have 16 line of duty deaths that are attributed to the exposure to toxins at the World Trade Center sites and the Pentagon and Shanksville. And we sadly are marking the 5th of April. We lost electronics technician William Lewis, who worked with us at the Pentagon. He was a person who responded with other radio techs and electronic technicians to keep the radio systems and phone systems working inside the Pentagon building, outside the Pentagon. So the teams that were working inside the building had communications. It was critical that we were able to communicate inside the building when we were doing the recoveries and evidence recovery. And the electronic technicians made that happen for us. And sadly, Bill Lewis just passed away this week and will be buried next Tuesday in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So he's the 7th person that we have lost, 6 agents and 1 professional support staff who responded to worked the scene at the Pentagon. On 9/11, as Gene said, we were at the field. I was at the field office. Gene was at Quantico, and we were all getting ready to go to New York to help when we were notified that there was smoke coming from the Pentagon, and that just doesn't happen. It's not like the Vatican where smoke comes out. The Pentagon doesn't have smoke come out, right? So we're starting to get our equipment ready to go to the Pentagon. Scott Stanley, who I mentioned earlier, he and I, both having previous lives in law enforcement and in firefighting, realized that we would rather be at the scene working on this. And so we got into my, at the time, Crown Vic and responded down to the Pentagon scene. And when we pulled into the Pentagon lot, you could just see the huge plume of smoke coming out of that and encompassing the entire grounds and people flowing out of the building. And we made our way over to the site. And one of the first things that we did as other agents started showing up, and there was triage going on with the military helping people that were badly burned, unfortunately deceased, and bringing them out onto the side lawn of the building. We started documenting it for our evidence procedures, photographing the building, the type of smoke, the color of the smoke, the damage to the building. Early on that morning, Garrett McKenzie, who's a retired agent, we went into the building and photographed areas where we believed the black box was going to be. And it was later recovered in that general area. But that's the type of thing that people were doing at the Pentagon, was starting the evidence collection process, setting up the scene, documenting what was happening. And at the same time, in New York City, at the World Trade Center, agents from 26 Fed, which is the building that houses the FBI, they were doing the same things. They were going down to ground zero. Unfortunately, many of them were caught out on the street when the buildings collapsed and narrowly escaped injury or death. And Lenny Hatton, unfortunately, one of our bomb techs that was assigned to New York City, he went into the buildings to help early on and was caught in the buildings when they collapsed. And he's the on-duty FBI agent that passed away that day. And John O'Neill, who was a figure, to say the least, within the FBI, he had just retired recently, and he was the head of security at the World Trade Center. And I worked with both of them at the USS Cole bombing, knew both of those guys. They were top of the line, and they both perished on the day of 9/11. And when we got done with the first days of 9/11, and we realized that we lost Lenny Hatton and John O'Neill, there was some relief that it was only 2 people that we lost, because the other agencies lost hundreds of people. So although we suffered those losses, we realized it could have been so much worse. And it isn't until 2019 that we're realizing that we're still losing people. Unfortunately, it's the same thing as losing them on that day, except it's taking years and years for the process to take place. And I've said in the past, it's like bin Laden is reaching out of the grave and still damaging the FBI and all the law enforcement and firefighters and other civilians that were in the area of these sites, something that's just continuing on. Jean was at Quantico, and she can explain what the first day was like for her at 9/11.
Yeah, basically, Rob Schwinger and I were both at an evidence response team course that day. Our pagers went off, and at the point where we learned that the Pentagon was hit, we both jumped in our cars and went north on 95 when pretty much the rest of D.C. was trying to get out of the city and head south. And we made it up to the Pentagon, and like Tom said, it was definitely surreal. There were people everywhere. But on day one, the teams, you just kind of got to the point. We got to our staging point, and it was not only FBI personnel on scene, but it was law enforcement agencies from all over the area. And what Rob and I did on the first day were we got plugged into line searches outside of the building. So like Tom said, we had people that were doing photography, but we knew that this was going to be a long process to process the scene there. And so, which means more response vehicles coming in and command posts coming in. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't lose any of the evidence that was on the ground. And as we know now, the plane came in very low. It hit light posts on the major roads that were there. And so there was debris throughout the area leading up to the Pentagon. And so we partnered up with our law enforcement partners and our task force officers from the Joint Terrorism Task Force and other task force within the Bureau, and collected that evidence and did documentation that day.
And it was a 24/7 operation. We did 2 shifts. They would rotate. You'd do your 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and then the next shift would come on. And so there were days once we got settled in, started working the recovery, we would run inside the Pentagon building 4 to 5 teams of led by FBI agents and staffed by all of the different law enforcement partners. And they would go in and do evidence and, unfortunately, victim recoveries. And then we also had a sifting area in the north lot, which debris was removed from inside the Pentagon and brought down in the north lot, and then it was sifted through there. And then there was a warehouse at Eade Street just down the road where that debris was then brought down and sifted through a third time. At the same time we were doing this, New York was doing the same types of work. And honestly, we didn't know that Flight 93 had gone down until much after it did. And I didn't know that the towers had collapsed until the next day. That's how much we were engaged in what we were doing at the Pentagon. And each one of those other sites were doing the same thing. This was your site and you were preparing to work those sites. We worked with the firefighters because at any of these sites, the fire chief is the on-scene commander until they turn that over to law enforcement, the FBI in this case, to work the crime scene portion of it. So we were there at the Pentagon for about 3 weeks, and our teams ran a temporary morgue where remains and bodies were taken to. We worked with the military in recovering them, the victims, but we documented each one of those victims and remains that were recovered inside the building. The damage that took place at the Pentagon between corridor 4 and 5, there were firewalls, and so it contained within a large section, but because of that, when the plane exploded inside the building, the fireball pretty much wrapped through each of the 5 floors back to A&E Drive, which is several rings in the Pentagon. So it was a very large area. In one night, I know we took out 72 dump trucks full of debris to bring down to the sifting area. So it was a constant. Teams would go in, work for a period of time, then come out. And it was just a rotation constantly for the entire time that we were down there. And in New York and Shanksville, we know Andrea Damon was the team leader in Shanksville, and they were doing the same thing, sifting through the debris from the crater where Flight 93 landed. And Richard Marks, who is a evidence team unit supervisor now, he was running the fresh kills portion of New York where they brought all the debris and sifted through. And as Gene said earlier, hundreds of agents rotated through that from across the country. And that's one of the things we are pushing people to sign up for these World Trade Center Health Monitoring Program and the Victims Compensation Fund, because it's not just a New York, it's not just a Washington or a Pennsylvania issue. There are agents from across the country that responded to these things. And we're finding that people are not just these 3 locations where people live. It's across the country where teams deployed from that people are getting sick. And we want to try and give everybody the best chance they can to identify that, get it taken care of early. And that's what these groups are doing, the funds that we'll talk about.
And I think some of the questions that we've answered over periods of time is, weren't you guys wearing respirators, right? And weren't you wearing protective gear, and shouldn't that have been enough to keep you safe? And the short answer is that on 9/11, we didn't have that equipment. So anybody that responded out on day 1 would not have necessarily had a respirator in their car. We would have clean clothes that you would go to a crime scene with, but our crime scene truck itself took hours to make it through the traffic to get across the bridge to get to the Pentagon. So that was where all of our Tyvek and the majority of our personal protective gear, besides gloves, because we all have gloves and bags and tags in our car, but we didn't have all of that. And even with that, it wasn't enough. Inside of the building, we would wear respirators, but you still needed to communicate, and it was difficult to communicate through them over the radio. Outside of the building, outside of the collapse zone, there was still smoke and fire and debris that we honestly didn't realize would be affecting us years down the road. So, we literally would put our mask on the second that we walked through the door into the building, but the same contaminants were affecting us outside.
Right. And we now see pictures of the team inside. It's hot inside, so you're sweating. And then when we took pictures with our cameras, the flash would identify the particulate matter in the air. It would show up because of the flash. And when you look at it now, you're like, there was a lot of stuff in the air that you just didn't know was there. And so that's landing on your skin. It's getting on you. It's affecting you in that manner also, the toxins, jet fuel, the crushed cement, think about all the computers that were in the World Trade Center or in the Pentagon that were destroyed, and all the fluorescent lighting, everything that when it burns, it's bad. That's what it was. So everybody did their very best to protect themselves, but unfortunately, our very best wasn't enough, and we're tracking dozens of people who have different illnesses, whether it be breathing issues and respiratory, and then the worst case scenario, the cancer type of illnesses.
And I think it's difficult for people to imagine what a building would look like when a plane crashes into it. So something like the Pentagon, everyone has memories of the World Trade Centers when it hit and then when it collapsed and how awful that was and the cloud that was associated with it. But I think the Pentagon, because it was pretty much a secure area and people were not allowed on site, they weren't allowed inside the building, it's hard to imagine what it looked like. And it really, truly was. There weren't walls. The supports that would hold the 5 floors up were just pulverized, and it was badly damaged rebar that might be holding it together. But there were just mounds and mounds of debris. So it was the plane mixed with the office furniture, mixed with the paperwork, mixed with anything that you would typically have in a typical office. And it's just, I think, hard for people to imagine.
Right. And our job was to go through, as I was one of the coordinators on the night shift that kind of organized the teams, and Jean was a team leader on one of the teams. And the job of those teams was to go in and systematically clear portions of the different 5 floors that we went through to clear, looking for victims and remains, and then also any evidence. And we did find stuff that you wouldn't think you'd find, box cutters and parts of passports from the actual terrorists, things like that still were found inside the Pentagon. It was a slow, methodical process, but you would take, like I said, 72 dump trucks of debris out in one night. That's all debris, which is unfortunately toxic, and people were handling it, moving it around, and that's where people became exposed to this stuff. And that's on all 3 sites. And when we talk about the sites, that also, wherever we're sifting debris, that's the same thing as being inside the Pentagon or the World Trade Center or Shanksville. It's the parts of the building and the plane and that stuff that were the toxic matter. It wasn't the location, right? So you could have been in the North Lot and still exposed, or at Eade Street still exposed to the same thing you would be inside the building.
As long as you were handling that debris.
That's right.
And I guess that's the issue that most of us weren't thinking about, because, there have been plane crashes and bombing sites before that people have responded to, but I guess it's that intense heat burning up all of that stuff that you talked about. That's what made these sites more toxic than, say, at Oklahoma City bombing or at the Cobor Towers or, any of the airplane terrorist bombings. That's what makes a difference. Is that correct?
Well, what we can say is that this event was medically studied by the NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and they spent a lot of time, effort, money to research the toxins and the illnesses that are coming out of it. And because of that, they're able to say that the exposure to these sites is something that is causing or exacerbating these illnesses. So we know scientifically that this is something that is happening from the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and Shanksville attacks.
And they've basically laid out a time period that as a first responder or someone lived within the area would need to be on site. So that is all laid out within the regulation and within their program.
And what is that time period? Are you saying somebody needed to work on site for this many hours before, or this many days, or this many months before they really should be concerned about being affected?
Yes, and basically there are very specific guidelines, but what we would say to the public is if you were on site for a day, you need to go to the World Trade Center Health Program and site and look at that, because the guidelines are basically 4 to 8 hours on site during specific days.
Okay.
And it does vary, but I would refer people, if you were on site for a day or within Lower Manhattan, go to the site and look at the guidelines to see if you fall within those parameters. Okay. Because we do have people who were on site for a very short period of time who have contracted an illness.
Right. It doesn't have to be that you're there for a week. It can be parts of a day that we're finding illnesses are being linked to. And the World Trade Center Health Monitoring Program, they've done a lot of research on this stuff, and we refer to them as the experts. We're just trying to get people to register that are people who should be registering. And there are guidelines as to who can register. And if you're an FBI agent who responded to one of these scenes and you're on site, you should call FBI headquarters and get your paperwork, which is then submitted into the World Trade Center Health Program for your registration. And the number for that is 202-324-3333. That's the Human Resource Division helpline. And tell them if you have photographs or anything like that can help you show that you were on scene there. There's documentation for many of the people who were on site, but there are other people who deployed down there in New York that may not have a document saying they were there, but they can get affidavits from 2 other people to say, hey, I was with this agent, we were down there, and it's very easy to do.
And this is for retired people as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Retired people also.
And it's not just for FBI agents. We have professional staff who are with us. There were law enforcement partners who were with us. If you are an FBI employee, obviously you're going to call our helpline. If you worked for another agency, the affidavit route that Tom referred to, or getting a letter from your own agency that can verify that you were a first responder would be the route to go.
Right. In the Pentagon in Shanksville, there's documentation to show who was on scene. So at the Pentagon, the vast majority of people that were on scene for any period of time had to get a security badge that allowed them onto the site. And so we have the database from that security badging system that the Secret Service actually came down and helped us with early on. And so if you worked at the Pentagon and you were issued a badge and you call into the 324-3333, they'll look at the database and say, there's Jerry Williams' name. Here's a photograph from that database, and you don't have to get the affidavits. If you call in from New York, Shanksville, or the Pentagon, and they don't have you on the list, then you just go back and find 2 people who you were with, and they do affidavits saying that I was with Jerry. And
this is what we were doing.
And this is what we were doing on that day. And then the Bureau will then issue a letter to the retired person or active agent. And then those letters are then sent in with your application to the World Trade Center Health Program. And as long as those 2 pieces of paper stay married together, if you're in New York, you can scan it. If you're at one of the other sites, then the suggestion is to fax it or mail it in to the World Trade Center together, because it's a large organization that's trying to document a lot of things. So we want to keep those two pieces of paper together, and that will get you enrolled in the program, in the World Trade Center Health Program. And one of the benefits for that, and you don't have to be sick. We want people to enroll in this stuff before they become sick, and hopefully they never will become sick. One of the things that does is annually, all of us that are enrolled go to a medical facility, and we get chest x-rays, we get respiratory tests, and we get blood work. And then you sit down with a doctor and they go over your numbers, and hopefully you walk out of there and they say, right now your numbers are good, you are not showing any signs of any issues, and you can feel better until you come back in again and do it again. And you should also go to your own doctors. Gene and I do it. We go to the World Trade Center Health Program doctors. We get that information done and checked, and then we set up our own medical, that you would do your own annual physical, and we bring that documentation from the World Trade Center Health Program into our doctor so that they have twice as much information. It's really trying to stay in front of anything so that if, God forbid something does happen to you, that you are able to get on it very quickly and catch it in its early stages, and you'll have the best chance of a great outcome.
Well, let's talk some numbers now, because whenever there is a health scare, the health scare becomes known because the numbers are askew. More people than ever, and why is that? A kind of situation. So, and then I know you mentioned earlier the number of people who had died that have been definitely shown to be related to contact with 9/11 toxins. Can you give us an idea of overall how many agents actually responded, and out of that number, how many people have gotten sick? Do you have that?
So
generally,
yeah,
we know that New York is a tough one because we have several offices and resident agencies there, and the vast majority of people responded. But what we are tracking are the two specific offices that fall within the geographical area, which is covered by the Victims' Compensation Fund and the World Trade Center Health Program. So we know within our agency that we have over 4,000 employees who responded to one or more of the sites. And of those, we have 16 who have passed away to date that we know are related to 9/11. And we have a few more historical cases that we are reviewing to see if there is a causation back to 9/11. It's not an automatic assumption, but we have 4 from Shanksville, we have 7 from the Pentagon, and 5 from New York at this point that we know are related to 9/11.
And when Gene says we're doing research on this stuff, it's not Gene and Tom O'Connor that are doing the medical research by any stretch of the imagination. What we're doing is gathering people's medical histories and their treatment histories, and then submitting it into doctors to review, an occupational doctor here in the FBI. And then if the case applies, it would go to the Department of Labor doctors to review, and potentially the public safety officers benefits and Victims' Compensation Fund. One of the things that I'm impressed with this whole program is that there are a lot of hurdles, which is not always a good thing. But in this case, there's a lot of boxes that need to be checked to make sure that the people that are enrolled in the Victims' Compensation Fund or the World Trade Center Health Fund, and they're getting payments for their medical, that they actually are people who were on scene and that were exposed. So people can rest assured that their tax dollars and the money being spent on these things is not just being given out to somebody who shows up and says, hey, I was there, I don't know anybody that was with me. There's a lot of documentation that goes into showing that someone was on scene, that they were exposed during that time period. And there's a lot of medical review that goes on to show that this exposure could have led to the illnesses that they have and that they've either are dealing with or unfortunately have passed from.
One of the things that I'm curious about is that I think most of us have heard about these type of databases and exposure issues when it comes to the New York City police officers and firefighters who responded that day. Because I've been hearing about, monitoring their health and people being sick. Why is it that we're just hearing about FBI employees? They were there too at the same time.
Right. So that's a great question. So I'll kind of give you the chronology of how this started and how this effort got started. Bob Roth was a team member of ours at the Pentagon and a friend of Gene and I in the field office. And Bob was a really healthy guy. He was in his early 40s when he first became ill. He was an avid runner, and he thought he had a hip injury. And he went to the doctor, and they kind of, said, hey, you should use these crutches for a while. And he did that, and then it didn't go away. And he went back, and they found that he had an illness which is called the multiple myeloma. And that is something that is normally diagnosed in a population which is elderly. And so that in of itself was kind of something different. And then Scott Stanley, who is a good friend of ours also, and he's a PhD, he's an agent, and he's really smart. So we lean on him for the medical parts of this stuff. But he started saying that this isn't just not normal for somebody to get that. And then shortly after that, Wesley Yu, who was also a friend of ours and was on the team with us at the Pentagon and worked at the Eads Street warehouse. Wesley, also a young, very healthy agent, he came down with the same multiple myeloma. And so that was back in 2000, I would say 8 and 9 area there. So we started raising our hands at conferences and saying, hey, what are we doing to monitor any illnesses? Because we were seeing exactly what you said, that the firefighters and police in New York City were developing illnesses. We're starting to hear about it at the same time. And the Bureau is an organization that has to research things, and that's what we do, right? We investigate things. So there was investigations that were kind of started. There was a study that was done, and they started looking into it back then. And then we started having other agents getting sick. And I'll tell you from the beginning, it was Paul Wilson, Bob Roth, Jerry Job, Bob Craig, Wesley Yu, Steve Carr. And then it went for a while, and then Rex Stockham, Lori Fournier, Mark Johnson, Dennis Bonelli, Jerry Senator, Melissa Morrow, Dave LaValle, Brian Cruz, Mark Mikulski, and this week, electronics technician Bill Lewis. So as these numbers kept coming in, we kept kind of raising our hand, and the Bureau really started to take notice of what's going on. And Director Mueller was interested in it and gave it the time and effort. And then Director Comey came in, and that's where things really changed. He took a very strong interest in the 9/11 illnesses, and there had been much more documentation by this point also medically by groups like the NIOSH and the World Trade Center Health Program that could actually substantiate what we were saying since 2008, and that there's something going on. Director Comey assigned Val Parlave, who was an executive assistant director at the time, to be the lead on this. And she took people and assigned them to doing the same thing and looking into this. The Human Resources Division, Mike Huff is a unit chief there, and he's been the one guy that was the constant all this time trying to review this stuff, getting stuff to the different agencies that need to look at it. And Director Wray has taken this on also. He's a strong advocate for agents in general. As the president of the Agent Association, I can tell you Director Wray is a strong advocate for the agent position. And when it comes to the 9/11 illnesses, he is an extremely strong advocate. Well, the first time I officially met with him as director was 3 days after he became director, and I handed him a coin from Police Week that had the names of the 7 agents that we were putting onto the wall that year. And I told him that this is one of the most important things that we're going to be dealing with in the future, and he fully agrees and has kept this. And that's why Gene and I are here, TDY to HRD, to help with this, getting people registered. So we have support from the FBI. It's just taken time to get the medical backing, I think, from the community and the Bureau. As you know, it's a big ship, right? And sometimes it's difficult and slow to turn that ship, but the ship is in the right direction now. And when we first started this, our goal, Scott, Gene, and myself, and Mike Huff, and others, Val Parlay, was to get these people named to the internal wall of honor, to have them recognized as line of duty death, and the National Law Enforcement Memorial Wall also, to have them named to that wall. That was really where we were aiming it, until we realized there were all these other programs out there to assist with the medical review. And if someone is signed up for the World Trade Center Health Program and they're getting their medical monitoring, and if unfortunately something happens where they become ill, if their illness is then certified by the World Trade Center Health Program, the World Trade Center Health Program will cover the expenses for that treatment, which is huge. That's why it's so important for people to get enrolled in the World Trade Center Health Program while they're healthy, and hopefully they'll never use it. But we've had cases where people did not enroll, they got sick, and it is much more difficult and slow to get that person enrolled and then get the illness certified while they're sick, right? So it's a very difficult task, and that's why we want people to enroll now. If you're on the site, if you can document that, and the Bureau can document that, we'll get the letters, we'll get it to the World Trade Center Health Program. They will sign you up for the program, and if, God forbid, something happens, then you're that much further down the road. One of the things we hear is that people say, I'm not going to sign up because I don't want to take away from anybody else. You're not taking anything away from anybody else. It's just putting your name in a queue that you're registered, and you're getting this medical review, which is not taking away from anybody else.
And I think it's important to take care of your family as well. We hear all different things. So we have heard, I don't want to take away from anyone else. I don't want to sign up because if I sign up, then I'm going to get sick. So the superstition thing is sometimes there, and I can speak to that on firsthand because my husband is a little bit superstitious. So
that Irish Catholic upbringing kind of makes you superstitious.
And so it took us, even though we were huge advocates for this, to actually sign up. But I can assure you that we are now, and we are receiving our monitoring. But the key is that if you do have an illness, as any federal government employee, you don't want to be doing paperwork when your focus should be on getting healthy, getting your treatment and getting healthy. You do not want to be adding the burden of having to complete the initial application for these funds while your focus should be on your health. And so our plea is get out there, get monitored to catch, if you're going to get something, catch it early. And then if you do, make sure that the proper fund is actually paying for your medical treatment. Even if you have health insurance, some of these illnesses are extremely expensive, and it counts against your lifetime catastrophic cap. And so if it is an illness that should be being paid for by the World Trade Center Health Program, let them pay for that part of it, and your health insurance will cover anything else that should come your way.
And Jerry, it's important to also say that it's an insurance policy for people that were on site that were exposed, that if something does happen to them, it puts their families in a better position for other programs which apply to line of duty deaths. The public safety officers benefit, the Department of Labor benefits, and then there's the Victims Compensation Fund, which right now is something that we're battling to try and get it renewed. The Victims Compensation Fund was designed to help people who need compensation. So Gene and I are both signed up for the Victims Compensation Fund. Knock on wood, we don't have any illnesses, so we're not taking anything from the Victims Compensation Fund. When somebody does become ill, or if unfortunately they pass, there are federal funds to assist the families. This program, the Victims Compensation Fund, runs out December of 2020 and ends. So there's two things that we want people to do. First, if you're a responder, sign up for the Victims Compensation Fund. What it does is it locks your date that you signed up in, okay? So if something happens to you down the road, you're in that program prior to the 12/20 deadline. The big problem right now is that the money in that program, because of the number of people that are ill from the fire departments, from the police departments, from other federal agencies across the board, and with the Bureau, that the money is depleting. And the special master, Rupa, who is in charge of the program, she is limited in an ability to get payment out to people who need it. They've cut the program by 70% if you applied after February 2nd. So what we need to do is get Congress and Senate to approve the Victims Compensation Fund, fully fund it so that it's there for people who need it, and extend it out to 2090, which is the same date that the World Trade Center Health Program is extended out to. And people can do that by contacting their congressman and senator and just letting them know that they want them to sign on to the bill that actually supports the Victims Compensation Fund. We've been on Capitol Hill as the FBI Agents Association, along with the John Feel Good Foundation and other organizations that are fighting for the people who are ill. And it's getting strong support, but it still has to get people in Congress to buy onto this so that they can vote to extend that. There's a latency in these cancers, and the medical community has said that they're 15 to 20 years. And so we're X number of years out, 18 years out, and we're in the middle of that, right? So we're seeing people that are being diagnosed, and we're 18 years away from that 9/11 date. And so we need to get that extended out so that people are cared for that deserve it. These people, all the FBI agents, police officers, firefighters, they responded to do the right thing on the day of 9/11 and the following weeks and months. What the United States Congress, Senate needs to do is be there for these people who deserve the support of our community. They did this job. We talk to them all the time. And these people would not have changed, as we said before, they would not have changed what they did that day because they thought they were going to get sick. They did their jobs. We're just asking that Congress and the Senate, that they do their jobs and pass this bill to support these people.
Well said. And I know that some people are listening to this as they're in their car or at the gym and, that don't have a pen available to jot down any numbers or any of the things that we've mentioned. So I do want to make sure that you know that in this episode's show notes, I will have links to articles. There have been a number of wonderful programs that FBI headquarters has been put on by the Public Affairs Unit, and so I'll have links to those. I'll also have links to newspaper articles that have been out in the mainstream media that support the work that's being done here.
Okay, great. Yeah, we just came out with a 2-page pamphlet that has a lot of this information on it, all of it. And so once it's released, we can make sure that you get a copy of it.
Okay, very good. That'd be great. Well, Gina and Tom, you've been able to provide us today with a lot of the things that we need to know about the complications of the people that responded, the first responders to the 9/11 attacks and all the different sites. And of course, you share with us your own personal stories of being there on that day. But I'd like to, if you don't mind, to learn a little bit more about you both. If you could kind of give us a quick rundown of when you joined the FBI and why you joined the FBI. And then, of course, we're also curious as to how you guys found each other. So do you mind?
No, not at all. Not at all. So I was a police officer in a city up in Massachusetts, Northampton, Massachusetts, a great community. I was a narcotics officer, and I was working with the state police drug task force, and they were working a motorcycle gang case in the western Massachusetts region, and the FBI was involved in the case. They were the lead, and I became involved in that. And as that case went forward, the agent agents that were on seeing Cliff Hedges, who's now retired, but a great guy. And he said to me one day, we were doing a surveillance, he's like, hey, have you thought about applying to the FBI? And I was like, first of all, how do you apply to the FBI? And this is before the internet was really anything, 1996. And so he gave me literally a photocopied piece of paper that I came home to Jean and said, hey, they're asking me if I maybe should think about joining the FBI. What do you think? And before I said anything, she said yes. We had been married for probably at that point 9 years before deciding to come into the Bureau. I had been with the police department, both the Amherst and Northampton Police Department, for a total of about 15 years. We had tried to have kids for several of those years, probably 6 of those years, and it didn't. We're one of those couples that didn't happen, right? So you take your lemons and turn it into lemonade. We decided we're going to go out and see the world. So we did apply. I applied. So every day you went out to the mailbox looking for the rejection letter, and the envelope kept showing up, and it was, a regular form letter. I'm like, all right, this is just a form letter. This is going to be, thanks for applying. I really appreciate it. And then it was hey, you continue going forward. And it got to the point where I had to go in to do what they referred to at the time. I don't know if they're still doing it, but it's called a spousal interview. And you bring your spouse, husband or wife, whoever is coming in with you, and they sit down and they say, Tom's going to be carrying a gun. And she's like, all right, great. He's been carrying a gun for 15 years. He's going to get called in the middle of the night. Okay, that's nothing new. So they finally started talking to Jean. They said, what do you do for a living? She said she's an audit officer for a local bank, which is pretty much an investigator for the inside of the bank and all the different compliances. And they said, okay, Tom, here's a videotape of the how to do push-ups, and literally a videotape. And they took Jean out of the room. So I was like, wow, separate and divide, right? They're going to separate us and question her differently. And I sat in the room like a moron watching a videotape of how to do pull-ups and push-ups. Icy Jenkins, I don't know if you know Icy, she was our fit instructor at Quantico, and she could do more push-ups than I've ever dreamed of doing. But I sat there and watched her technique, and then about a half hour later, Jean came back into the room.
Yeah, and I had an application, much to his surprise, and he said, so what's that? And I'm like, it's an application for the FBI. And he's like, what, like as a clerk or something? And I'm like, no, for an agent position.
I was like, oh boy, there goes my world.
And so you had not thought about it before, Jean?
Not particularly about being an agent. I had worked for a bank that had some issues, and in the auditing department, we and my coworkers had found a commercial loan officer who was defrauding the bank and giving loans to friends and family members that were not documented correctly, nor should they ever have been given. And we had reported that, and it was a case that finally went to court. And so I had volunteered to be interviewed by the FBI at the time for that case. And so I had always tried to do the right thing and make sure that people who were guilty were brought to justice. And so I know in the back of my mind,
she had actually mentioned the FBI before we were actually married, because she rented an apartment with somebody who was an FBI employee in Boston. So she clearly thought about the FBI before I did. I got in first, I'll give you that. I applied, my application went through. I was in class 97-9. Then I got out and it was assigned to Washington field office. We moved to D.C. and Jean's application went through and came in.
Well, I was in class 98-9. The truth is, I actually wanted to make sure he was going to leave home.
Yeah, so. That's accurate. Yeah. Mama's boy didn't want to leave Massachusetts. When you grow up in Massachusetts, there's no reason to leave. But because of the Red Sox and the Patriots are there, so why would you have to go anywhere else? But we came to Washington, and a year later, Jean got on to the FBI. She was obviously assigned to Washington field office. I was working on the Joint Terrorism Task Force from the day I landed at Washington Field, and I'm still assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So I'm like the anomaly with the FBI. I've been doing terrorism the entire time I've been here and loving it.
Yeah, and when I came in, I was initially assigned as healthcare fraud, and a supervisor a few years into my career took two of us from the squad and brought us over to work international drugs. And while we were on that squad, 9/11 happened, and eventually my squad was combined with another one, and the Bureau was focusing more on terrorism at the time. And so I volunteered to go to an extraterritorial terrorism squad, so working the overseas cases, and then eventually took over as the senior team leader of the Washington Field Evidence Response Team.
And I'll tell you, we have 158 days left in our career. We're retiring on September 11th in honor of our fallen. But it's been a great career, really has. We have done some stuff that you never would have thought a local cop from Massachusetts would do. I mean, just the deployments, the Cole bombing, the Africa bombing attacks, Kosovo, the 9/11 stuff that we'll never forget. And then Jean and I have been to Pakistan for bombings together. We've been to Iraq 4 times together. She's been to Yemen 5 times for cases. We have traveled the world. This is the greatest job you could ever have. And to have done it together, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of surprised you guys tricked me, because there are a number of married agent couples in Philadelphia. At one time, we had as many as 7. And most of those, or I think all of them, met once they became an agent. And so it's refreshing to hear a story where a married couple came into the Bureau together. And that brings me to an email that I got just last week. So this is perfect timing. It's from George, and George is a Navy veteran, and he wrote me. I get lots of letters from people interested in the FBI now, and if I can answer the question, I answer it, and if I can't, then I always say contact your local recruiter. But this particular one came in, and George was saying that he and his wife were both considering applying to become an agent, but they were unsure if one of them should apply first or if they both should just submit their applications at the same time. So what do you say? What do you say to George and his wife, who he did not name?
I would say, in hindsight, I would probably say go ahead and both apply at the same time.
Yeah.
And I was half kidding when I said I wanted to make sure that
she
Tom
wasn't.
left home.
Mm-hmm.
But he truly, to his core, loved being a local law enforcement officer. And I truly wasn't sure that he would actually leave that. And so we made the decision to do it separately, but it was a choice where he ended up getting through the academy, graduating, and I was still working in Massachusetts. I was in the process of becoming an agent, but for the first time in my life, we made the decision that we didn't want to live apart. And so I moved to D.C. without being fully through the process, and did not work for a few months while that was happening. In hindsight, I think I probably would have applied a little bit sooner and hopefully have been going in closer to that same amount of time. And I did have a classmate who was a twin, and his wife went into a class shortly after he did. So they were not in the academy at the exact same time, but much closer than a year apart. And ironically, his wife actually went through the same class with his brother. So
the family plan.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say that, honestly, the reason that I went first was just because I was already in law enforcement and had that contact with the FBI. If you're coming in cold, I would say there's no reason not to join together. I would tell your emailer that this is literally a great gig. And Director Ray just testified up on the Hill yesterday, I believe, that our numbers for recruitment are up. And that's great, because this really is an amazing organization. You can do some stuff that you just can't believe that you're involved in. And it is amazing. It is a great opportunity. And I think to do that with your spouse is interesting, because you can come home from work and actually talk about work. Where in a lot of cases, there's a husband or wife that is, one is an agent, one's not. There's a lot of stuff in any law enforcement organization that you really can't talk about. And in federal organizations like the FBI, there clearly is a lot of stuff that you can't go home and talk about. And honestly, there are things that we've had in our career that one does not have a need to know, and the other person just knows that don't ask questions about it because you don't have a need to know. There might be a little prying here and there, but nobody ever gives up what they are not supposed to give up. But it's been a great gig. And, honestly, to be deployed to war zones and major incidents and to be there, with your spouse and along with the team, it really is pretty cool. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of people that have had that opportunity. And I think we've been very lucky. No regrets whatsoever at all.
Well, Gene, let me ask one other question, and I think I took a stab at it, and I think I answered the question correctly. But of course, one of his concerns was the fact that agents have to be ready to be transferred anywhere in the country, and he wanted to know what happens in the situation where you are a married couple.
So, if you're a married couple, if you both join, they're going to put you in the same location. Where that gets a little bit tricky, or could, is if you both decide to move up in the management chain and move up in the organization, you can end up in two different field offices or two different parts of the country. If one of you decides to go up in the management chain and the other one remain as an agent, they will keep you together. So you will be transferred together.
Very good.
Yeah. The Bureau does a really good job through HRD and the transfer unit to make sure that they're not splitting up families that they don't have to. Like Gene said, if two people want to become ASACs, then they potentially could end up in different field offices. But if you're, want to be agents and work the street and do your job, you're going to stick around the same place together. So they're not going to send me to Butte, Montana. Well, they may. You never know.
I might arrange that. We're in HRD right now.
In the last 58 days, I might not mind being sent to Butte, Montana, and then end up there, right?
Yeah. Not a bad place. Well, you've mentioned...
Not at all.
You've mentioned HRD several times, and I know that it stands for Human Resource Division, but there'll be a number of people who will email me and ask me, what is HRD? So I just want to clear that up.
Yeah, and HRD is where the medical unit is based. So for the 9/11 illnesses and death cases, that's where it works at. Mike Huff is the unit chief and the unit that pushes this stuff through to Department of Labor and really advocates for the agent population and any other employees that get caught up in this, that's for sure.
When I was introducing you, I told everybody that you were the president of the FBI Agents Association. Could you tell us just a little bit about what you do?
So the FBI Agents Association is a non-governmental organization. Its purpose is to support FBI agent membership. We have about 14,000 members, of which about 90% are the active agents in the FBI. Then we have about 1,000 people that are retired agents who are lifetime members of the FBI Agent Association. And for your retired members of your podcast that are out there, it's $250 and you get a lifetime membership and you don't ever have to pay anything else. So it's a great deal. We've never changed that over the years. The most important things I think the FBI Agents Association do is, one, advocate for agents and our better work environment is in working with FBI headquarters, working with legislators on the Hill to make sure that FBI agents are represented. But really, it's come around to our 501c3, our charitable side of the FBI Agent Association. We have two charities. I'll let Gene talk about the Memorial College Fund, but the other one is the Membership Assistance Fund. And we've put out about $1 million to our membership, and that is for any type of unforeseen financial issues that come up. And that can be an agent member who child is sick. We've had spouses sick. We've had houses that burn down. And it's an immediate financial assistance to that member that really, really is very, very helpful. And it is It is a great thing that we started about 5 or 6 years ago, and it has become very, very supportive of our membership by being able to do that. The College Fund is something that's been going on for a number of years, and I'll let Jean, who's a trustee of that, explain how great a deal that is.
So the Memorial College Fund was started in the early 80s after we lost 5 agents in a very short period of time out of the New York field office. And we have what started as an interest-free loan to students, and it's basically to either the spouse and or children of agents who we have lost both in the line of duty or from natural causes. And it started as an interest-free loan and has evolved over the years, and now it's a scholarship for children. And currently, we are paying 75% of all of their college tuition, room and board, books. There isn't a guarantee. It's based on how healthy we keep the fund, but that's what we are currently paying in 2019. And we have assisted over 200 children with their college education. And it's a wonderful thing. And tying back to the 9/11 deaths, we have 20 children from our agents who have passed from the 9/11 illnesses. We have approximately 30 children that we are assisting each year for the last several years. And we know of about 70 more who are in the pipeline. They're just much younger when their parent passes away. So we track them from that point forward. And then we are reaching out to them to make sure that they're well aware of the scholarship and are applying as they get to be scholarship age.
Some of the other things that the association does is if an agent dies in accidental death, would be a line of duty death or a car accident off duty, any accidental death, we have an insurance policy that we do, self-insured, and that family immediately gets a large amount of money to them to assist with all sorts of things that a family would need. So that comes along with being a member of the Agent Association also. We also are up on Capitol Hill working with legislators to pass legislation that will benefit FBI agents in their careers. And most recently, during the government shutdown, we were the voice of federal law enforcement for the opening of the federal government, where we went for almost 3 paychecks without people being paid. And so we came out very strong and loud on that topic. And I think we were successful in assisting in having that the government reopen, which is pretty neat for an association to be involved in. So it's a great organization, and every agent should be a member. What we always like to say is that you're not joining to take care of your own family. You're joining to take care of the family of the person sitting next to you, the agent sitting next to you.
Well, this has been great talking to you. I learned so much about the 9/11 illnesses, and I'm hoping that we get the word out to any retired agents or relatives of retired agents so that we can spread the word for them to sign up. I think it's great also. I mean, the majority of the people who listen to the show are, out in the public, but I think this episode provides a good understanding of the work that was done, by the first responders to those terrorist attacks. And I think that's very important for people to know and for, people to understand the sacrifices made that day and that continue to be made because of these illnesses and exposures to toxins. So I really, really appreciate you coming on today and sharing this information with us. What I like to do is to give my guest the last word. So I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, I'll give Tom the last word, but I just want to take this moment to thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to actually try to get the word out to the retired population, as well as to our other law enforcement partners and other firefighters who might not know about these programs. But I also want to say that if you are a first responder as a Bureau employee and you are sick in some way and you feel that it might be related to 9/11, please contact 202-324-3333. And that is our FBI Human Resource Division call center, and request them to put in a request for a 9/11 related Human Resource Division assistant. So basically, you're going to make a phone call to that call center, let them know that you need someone from the Human Resource Division to call you back. So it's the same number as getting your letter, but it will be a live body on the other end of that phone that can kind of walk you through applying to these different programs if you are currently sick.
Yeah, I think that's important. The FBI has done a lot of work trying to simplify the process for people to call in, get their letters so they can actually sign up for the World Trade Center Health Program and the Victims Compensation Fund. And it's not without hiccups over the years, and that's how you learn and make it better. And right now, the call center is very attentive. They're answering those questions. They're getting out the letters. They're getting people to register. And as Jean said, if somebody does have an issue already, then call in immediately, get that stuff started. And even if you don't have anything, make sure you call in if you were a responder to any of these things. That really is our mission, to get as many people as we can that were on site signed up so that they can get the services that they deserve. We can hope that everybody stays very healthy and that these numbers drop. I hope they do. I don't know that that's going to happen right away. So make sure that everybody is covered. Can't say thank you enough, Jerry, for helping us out with this. We're avid listeners to your podcast, and I know that my entire squad at the Washington field office, CT4, listens to this podcast. And you're teaching new agents by listening to the old agents that are talking about their old cases, because investigations in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s are the same as they are today in a lot of ways. And in time coming, you'll have people calling up and telling you stories about their cyber cases and how that happened, because that's the wave of the future.
And that's the end of the interview. At jerrywilliams.com and this episode's show notes, you'll find photos of Jean O'Connor and Tom O'Connor. There's information about the FBI Agents Association. There's a number of articles about 9/11 line-of-duty deaths, and an online tribute, not just for FBI agents, but for all law enforcement first responders who have died due to 9/11 complications. I hope you enjoyed the episode and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. If they're not sure how to listen to a podcast, have them listen to the post on my website, How to Listen to a Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, or anywhere you listen to audio. Soon you'll be able to pick up a copy of my nonfiction book, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives. Coming soon to all stores where books are sold. It's a 55,000-word expanded version of my popular FBI reality checklist. If you enjoy police procedurals, I hope you also consider picking up copies of the crime novels in my FBI Philadelphia Corruption Squad series, Pay to Play, and Greedy Givers. The crime fiction series features Special Agent Carrie Wheeler, Temptation, Corruption, and Redemption. The books are available as ebooks and paperbacks at Amazon.com, and Pay to Play is also an audiobook. I want to thank you for listening to the very end, and I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.